G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic end to your week as well, and that Monday isn't too painful for you. And this video will be, I promise, shorter than yesterday's, but those that stuck with me for over 60 minutes, I really appreciate you, but don't spend 4% of your day with myself. So legends, look, as always, we have a lot to go over. I've got some information from an expert in his field about what he believes happened to the Ursa Major, of course, that Russian transport ship carrying parts for their nuclear icebreakers, and what may have happened there. I'll keep digging into this and see what I can find. I want to talk about changing opinion and views. Of course, we'll look at the maps. I've got a lot of geolocations and footage of attacks, as well as where troops are, to show you where exactly there are forces on the maps. I want to look at new weapon systems coming into play, as well as the industrial capacity of systems. I want to talk about Kursk and the reality there as far as I see it. You may know I've been very outspoken about Kursk from an opinion of attritional protracted warfare, going, this does not make sense with what we know about attritional and protracted warfare. And in my opinion, and I hope that I'm wrong, but in my opinion, I think so far I have been correct about if you are numerically inferior to the opposing side, the last thing you want to do is have an area you open up another couple of 100 or 1,000 square kilometers that you have to man. That is not easy for your logistical supply. And we'll look at what the reality of Kursk has actually become, as I believe it has helped Russia strategically more than Ukraine, although it has been embarrassing. Russia's had to put a lot of assets there, but long term, this is why I believe we haven't seen Russia throw everything at to pull it back, is if everything but a negotiation, I believe is in some ways potentially helping Russia. I want to talk about one of the best things I've read for a while about long-range strikes. And this goes about how the ATACMS and Storm Shadows and Scalps are being used and how they could be used far more effectively. And it goes into something that you and I have spoken about before, about how to reintroduce maneuver warfare into a protracted positional warfare, how that has to take place. And this touches directly on what you and I have spoken about before. And Robert Fico, I always pronounce it Fico, but people always say it's Fico of how it's actually pronounced. But of course, the leader of Slovakia and President Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, they have been really going at it over Ukraine cutting gas to Slovakia. And now Zelensky basically saying that Fico is a puppet of President Vladimir Putin and entering a new phase of the war. So we'll go over that as Fico saying, well, the energy we supply into Ukraine, we may not be able to if we can't get that gas. And these two are going at it. And then I've seen someone else go, has anyone asked, though, if Slovakia can't have this cheap gas, can they actually afford the increased price of gas or electricity for it? So we'll go over all of this. But this is something important I want to point out in the beginning of this video, and we're going to look at this later as well. And many go, oh, you've changed this, you changed that. No, you should always be, your opinions should always be in a state of flux when evidence comes or learning about doctrine or extra information. And this is something that myself and the economic expert touched on in our podcast. The link in the beginning of the description, if you want to read that or watch that, is many would rather defend their ignorance than comfort the discomfort of being wrong. Now, I can't remember who said that, so I am claiming it. But I believe this is what we're seeing in this war. Many would rather defend just going with what they know is wrong rather than accepting they're wrong and changing where they feel about this. And this goes into what I first want to talk about, is the censorship of Deep State map. Now, we have got an update from Deep State yesterday, but not today. And what I cannot believe that the pro-Ukrainian accounts are not absolutely livid, incredibly outspoken about what the Ukrainian General Staff have done to the censorship of Deep State. Obviously, these people don't understand what Ukraine say they're fighting for. The hypocrisy around this is massive. To see Deep State, who is crowdfunded, open source mapping, then be censored, taken down for days at a time. This is exactly what people talk about. This is what Ukraine is fighting back against in Russia. These people not calling this out on that side, they're anti-Russia. They're not pro-Ukraine, or they're just so pro-narrative that they're not seeing where there are holes in this, and that is very detrimental to the future of Ukraine as a whole. These pro-Ukraine accounts not calling out what has happened to one of their own, to Deep State, that is concerning, and I believe that is disgusting. That I am sticking up for this the most as a neutral, I try and be unbiased observer who leans on the pro-Ukraine side, but that is the biggest thing that has happened this week that people are ignoring because it doesn't suit the narrative of this Denmark-style democracy and US-style freedom. No, that's not true. And if you want the best future for Ukraine, you also need to call out that bullshit. And if you want a future for Ukraine, you also need to look at the command, the corruption, the manpower problems that is occurring, as well as on the other side, but not shifting blame purely just onto military aid and support for Ukraine. And do you want the best of what is for Ukraine or just the worst of what for Russia? And although there's a lot of overlap, 90% overlap, again, there is that 10-20% which people need to see some hard truths of. And a commenter here goes by the name of Thomas on my Telegram said something that is very good. The world, instead of seeing a collapse of the Ukrainian front lines, what Ukraine does and says are now entering a cataclysmic stages of end war. That is why I believe we're seeing such a massive increase on propaganda, a shift from the main battlefield into propaganda, moving people's eyes to areas that aren't as significant to try and shift what is actually happening there. With Commander Kursk and Ukraine's top brass is going as far as to disarm deep state UA's capability to report with credibility. This is end of World War II Germany levels of censorship. I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but it is a level of censorship. And what people could say is more Russian-style censorship, what is meant to be being fought back for. We saw the same thing when Russia had a brain aneurysm over Wagner PMC. Also storming Moscow, they arrested Intel Slava admin. That's another large telegram. However, Ukraine's dilemma is not short-lived and is a long-term failure. And I believe that 100%. You can see how passionate I am about this. People should be calling this out, and those that aren't, I'm like, well, you're just here to drink Kool-Aid. You're not here for the best for Ukraine, the best for the people that live there, and this freedom, democracy, which you are meant to hold so high, and freedom of press and freedom of expression. So let's look at some new weapons, and then we'll go into the reality of Kursk, what is happening, maps, everything. So one of the main things I've seen, and I talk about fiber optic drones a lot, but this is another different type of drone here. Now, it's a bit difficult to see, but this is a Ukrainian drone here, armed with a shotgun, engaging, said to be a Russian FPV. Now, I believe it is potentially 2 shotguns on this. This is very, very interesting. Now, I have reached out to my drone guy, and I will get more answers on exactly what is happening here and maybe who is helping with development of this, or if it is a completely domestically made product. But this is something that we will see more and more, is either drones armed with, say, a gun, or drones that are to kamikaze into another drone in the air, which we do see. We even see drones armed with a net to take down drones. Now, there is said to be a new Russian self-propelled gun, an artillery piece here, said to fire 50 kilometers with boosted rounds and increased ability for these guided munitions as well. And you can see videos of these with that guided munition. What I don't know is if it is GLONASS guided, the Russian equivalent of GPS, or it is laser guided. Now, I would say that it is laser guided, as there's been a lot more success with artillery shells from laser guidance than there has from GPS or GLONASS. Of course, Ukraine has the Excalibur GPS shell. If you're just hearing about this, that is because they made a very big difference for the first 6 weeks. And I believe what the US said was after the first 6 weeks, there was a 90% inefficiency of that shell. So they'll just expensive, dumb shells at that point of the jamming. Because you got to go from the shell to the satellite back down, it's a long way, rather than you've got your drone in the air like this, painting a target, talking to the shell as it comes near it and closer. It's just less area and way less power as well to be jammed. So the Malva gun, we're seeing that enter service, and it will be very interesting to see what changes this can make on the front line. Again, one system is never going to make there's no such thing as a wonder weapon, although we have seen them spoken about throughout the war. Now, in March 22, as far back as March 22, almost 3 years back at this point, we were told that Russia was essentially out of missiles, and that the sanctions put against Russia, this would stop replenishment and replacement of the reserves and the ability to fire those missiles because of the high-tech components. I've done a couple of podcasts with a PhD in electronics who has said, no, this is definitely not the case due to the size of the transistors in these. They still will be able to. But Andrew Yusov, representative of Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, has come out with this, that the aggressor country, Russia here, is capable of producing 120 to 150 Iskander's, Calibers, and X-101 missiles per month. Now, this is vastly different, but what I'll say is with any of these numbers, whether they're speaking about their own capacity, if it's Russia speaking about their capacity, Ukraine speaking about their capacity, or speaking about each other's capacity, of course, there is incentive here to have a form of propaganda, like in 22 when Russia they have one or two more barrages of missiles left. Take it with a grain of salt. But this is interesting to see. So what we can take out of this is definitely the minimum. We just don't know where the ceiling of that would be. Representative of the military intelligence, along the 1,400 missiles in Russia's reserve, there are 350 then calibers, 500 Onyx, 50 air-launched Kinzhal, 130 Iskander's, and 400 of the X-101, saying on many positions, this is an untouched stockpile. Therefore, they pay a lot of attention to planning, reconnaissance, and do not act recklessly as they did during the early stages of the full-scale invasion, when, of course, they had a heap of it. And I don't know if anyone knew about the stockpiles because we were told that the stockpiles were empty. But a lot of this is firing new. They're developed, they're put on the front line, and they're shot in. That is similar with a lot of weapons on both sides of this war, digging into strategic reserves. But saying here that there are still untouched stockpiles. My opinion on this, for the Iskander, I don't know how many Iskanders Russia had. I don't know how many they're making. It's a minimum, I say, of it was 100 and 150 is the 120 here is all of these types. But I remember the article said 80 to 100 around that. Russia seems to be able to use Iskanders unbelievably often. Seems to just be an endless supply of them, and they are having a big difference on the front line. Let's talk about long-range strikes and some problems here, then we'll look at the maps. It lines up from talking of long-range Russian strikes to long-range Ukrainian strikes here, of course, with ATACMS and Storm Shadows. Now, two people you should go and follow is John Helen, who I've spoken about a lot. I use his fortification maps, and this Pussy Peronian as well. You should follow both of these accounts. Now, this is something we've spoken about. ATACMS, like the most precision weapons, have the most effect and impact when used en masse in geographically limited area within a narrow time window as is possible, combined with decisive combined arms operation. Their use should be concentrated in time and space. And this is just synonymous of what I have said previously, although I use different words. What I've been saying for months, to reintroduce maneuver warfare and to have more success and effectiveness and impact of ground strikes, air strikes, all combined arms, needs to be, the words I use is simultaneous and successive. And this says, if you read the problem of restoring maneuver in contemporary war, so this goes over how to restore maneuver in contemporary protracted attritional warfare. And it says that operations need to be simultaneous and successive whenever launched. As will usually be the case, a single offensive will not be able to achieve the operational objective on its own. So there won't be one decisive attack, but you need attacks that are simultaneous and successive. This is always what I thought about Kursk, and that's some foreshadowing. We're going to go talk about Kursk. I've always been, when is the next thing coming? Because I expected this and then simultaneous and successive pieces, but those never came. Therefore, Kursk is ground to what it is. Russia's regaining ground, and at the moment, very large losses of ground, of men, of machine on both sides, but who can afford it the least is Ukraine on the front up in Kursk. This guy continues here. Ukraine chose to use its limited stockpile of Storm Shadow and later ATACMS to strike high value in material and propaganda targets of opportunity spread out over geography and time, which diluted their overall impact and effect. Again, simultaneous, successive. This isn't only due to Ukraine's use of them, though. It's also due to having limited numbers. They need to go for the highest impact on target of what is it and what propaganda does that actually create. Now, I call out a lot of propaganda, but I do also understand that propaganda is an incredibly important part of war. But it is telling when one side leans so far into the propaganda and away from the main battlefield, it does tend to say that things are worse than they are, and we could be coming towards the end of a war to try and change narratives. He continues here. Ukraine chose to use them to make this war as embarrassing and as costly as possible for Russia, and that certainly has some value. But aside from pushing Russian support and logistics further away from the front line, their use had only very limited effect. And I don't think you can argue with this. Has it pushed things further away? Has it made things more difficult? Yes. Has it changed the overall battlefield situation, like he says here? No, it has not. It's made it more expensive. It's made it more embarrassing. It's made it more difficult. Has it changed and swung tides? No. Over the summer of 23, Ukraine used the Storm Shadow in this fashion instead of concentrating their use against Russian command control logistics and support assets in support of their summer offensive. Again, going against things that were for embarrassing and costly as possible, not on directly things at the front line which will have an effect. We saw the exact same thing here in Kursk as well. And I do know what the reason these weren't used in Kursk was a lot of policy, but at the end of the day, it still has the same outcome. And what I say here, and I've reiterated this 10 times, I'll probably reiterate it again in this video, is propaganda in attritional war, successfully, propaganda is used to support military operations, not the other way around. You don't have propaganda as the military operation. That is a telltale sign that things are going really bad. You have your military operation and propaganda to support that. That as well, to link back to Kursk, has always been a concern of mine as well. It's a little bit like with what Warren Buffett says about investing. If you can't explain it to like a 6-year-old, then it doesn't really make sense. That was misquoting there, but you understand what I mean. He continues, yes, some command posts were hit, some logistics were affected, and quite a few flashy targets in Crimea were destroyed. Again, hitting the naval headquarters is important. It's a flashy target. Is it command, logistics right on the front line in a land battle that we're seeing? No, flashy target. I think there's been so much emphasis and effort put on what looks good rather than what affects things, when instead there should have been an intensive flurry of strikes against a single Russian division and army corps and army assets above. And I agree with this. I agree things were, the sexy things, for want of a better word, were hit, but what's really helping? Why not all the command of where was pushing right on Avdiivka or Bakhmut or X, Y, and Z? To concentrate shock efforts from disrupted communications, material and personal losses and impaired logistics in order to create the best possible chance for a breakthrough, ATACMS should have been used in a similar fashion, Ukraine being unable to decisively, so used all at once in areas, simultaneous, successive, like we have said. Leverage them to obtain operational successes, not wasted, but not used to their fullest potential either. And I don't think you can, people can argue whatever you'd like, but I do think that these have not been wasted, but have they been used to their fullest potential? No. When the gates opened for the policy of Ukraine to use ATACMS and Storm Shadow, I thought we were going to see like 100 fired at once, and we definitely have not seen this. What I'm most worried about is that getting the ATACMS and similar high-profile, difficult-to-attain weapon systems has taken political capital, time, and energy from acquiring more basic necessities like munitions, personal gear, medical equipment, artillery, and vehicles. This is something you and I have spoken about so much. The focus on sexy, good PR weapons, F-16s, ATACMS, Storm Shadows, Abrams, whatever. Difficult to attain, political capital, time and energy into getting these and manpower to operate these, that there's been more of a focus on those expensive, complex, technical systems rather than these basic things that may not be as PR worthy, but which are lacking at the front line. Fortifications, night vision goggles, munitions, personal equipment, and lastly, actually men at the front line also. There's been more on that winning the Twitter battle rather than what is needed at the front line. How many shells could have one F-16, which I don't know what involvement has been taken so far, how many shells or manpower, hours, political capital could have you had at the front line instead of that system sitting in a reinforced bunker somewhere? Have Leopards, Abrams and Charlies made a difference over if we could have got Ukraine triple the amount of T-72s from somewhere else? I would have said no. I would have gone with the old T-series that the mechanics, the drivers, whatever, don't have to be trained on, buy them somewhere else way cheaper rather than what looks good and the hurrah, kumbaya singing. And these vehicles, which were all consumed in huge quantities and the lifeblood keeping Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield. And I couldn't agree more with that. I'd like to share that from this gentleman. So before we get into the reality of the Kursk, we of course will talk about and look at the maps, and then we'll finish with Kursk, the reality there, and I want to call out some BS too. So of course, here's Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv, the occupied areas in red since 22, the purple since 2014, of course, the red check over the past 24 hours, ground which Russia is occupying. Now, you will see some extra red lines on this map. That is just border correction somewhere. I don't really know what is with this. Down in Robotne, you will see some green in here. This is same as border correction again, but not like the other red that we see down in Melitopol, so don't worry too much about this. Where should we head first? Roll the dice. We'll come down into Kurakhove. Now, we see some red check through the centre of Kurakhove as well out from Stary to Ni. I don't believe these are new gains on this map. Sadly, Deep State, to no fault of, well, there's some fault of their own because they weren't keeping up with the maps anyway, but to mostly fault of other commanders, as far as their statement goes, has lost a lot of credibility, sadly. So it's difficult. So let's look at the Noel reports map. He shows a lot of ground being made through the center of Kurakhove as well. Again, not great to see because it's difficult on this, but I believe this road coming out here, I believe it's this road right here, I believe. So showing that the map is right up into sort of this area here somewhere. And I've got a geolocation to show you in here, but I'll show you a couple of maps first. Then we have Syriac maps showing that majority of the residential parts of Kurakhove, or almost all the residential, has come under control, and there's some mines and some industrial sectors left. And then I have a geolocation for you. So the geolocation sits right on this pin drop here. So that pin drop is close enough to right where my cursor is, but on the outskirts of the grey zone there, of course, where Syriac is showing under control. And what we can see is there are Russian forces operating in here being targeted by drones. So we can definitely say there's forces up to here, potentially red up that far, like Syriac is showing. So let's just move down to the south of Kurakhove while we're here. We can see that there has been then a significant portion of red checks shown on this. Other maps showing that Russia's right up to where the waterway runs in there. And that's more what I think relates to the front line and where sectors are using that as a natural barrier. Same direction in here. See this? This is this exact area, but saying it's pushed all the way up to the waterway. But to the south of Rozliv here, we can see on this Syriac map that he's showing this area in here, basically the same, is coming under control of the Russian forces. So we know there was movement in this direction. And just north of here, slightly says little square paddock right in there is coming under control, at least from what Syriac maps is suggesting. Now, let's move our way up a little bit and we'll come to the Pokrovsk area, Shevchenko. So let's have a look. This is Shevchenko in here. We can see just to the south of Lysivkia, a little bit of red check. But let's look Shevchenko, Pishani, Pokrovsk. Of course, in the direction of Udashny, Pokrovsk, Minograd, all very, very important sectors here. So I'll show you some geolocations as well in here. Noel reports he doesn't show that Russians have entered Pishani, but does show that Shevchenko has come under complete occupation of the Russian armed forces. But then let's have a look at this geolocation. Pishani right in here, right in the outskirts, sort of center of the grey zone in here. I won't show you the footage, but there are Russian forces. This is a guy down in here working amongst these sheds here being targeted by drones. So definitely here, potentially red. We will see. I'm seeing more drone footage rather than close arms. What to my eye means, well, those drones will be working in uncontested sort of small arms area. So there's definitely fighting here. It's probably grey zone, but probably leaning to the red as Russia continue to advance in the direction of Udashny and, of course, Pokrovsk. Let's have a look. We have another map here while we're speaking of Pokrovsk. Let's just zoom out one more, and we just have a little bit of ground being made up this road in here. Nothing too substantial. Like we've said, and like we predicted, we did say we believe the Russian gains would slow down over December, January, as the weather is the opposite of what it is here in Australia. It's smoking bloody hot, but we would say that it will slow down and potentially then increase after. Then we'll come down Toretsk. We see the center of Toretsk, a small piece of ground being made by the Russian forces in here, still not showing where others are claiming Leonidivka up to Petrivka are coming under control of the Russian forces. So let's open up Syriac, and this shows significantly different. It does show Ukraine did have some pushback around this Petrivka front. See where it turns out sort of to the north here along this train line, that Russia was pushed back, but is filling up this area, this Nepelivkia, this front line in here. Let's look at what he has said. The situation was clarified where Russian army failed to consolidate positions taken recently. So remember, talking that it had moved up into here and back. Now, one thing we need to take into account is this is not the first time Syriac has said that Russia has failed to gain positions from Leonidivka to Petrivka. There has been some forward and back in this direction. So we'll continue moving up. And then, of course, we have Chassivya, an area we haven't seen move for some time, but is being ignored in here, especially around the Klishkivka front for now. I want to say like 4 to 6 months. But let's have a look here. And you can line up where these forested areas and these other areas are. Of course, we have this is right in here that Russian forces have moved through and are up to where I believe this is probably a mine in this area. Russian army took control over the district north city. So it is Pivneshny right in here. Now we'll further move up to then Siversk. And what we talk about Siversk is even the Ukrainian commanders, Incorrect. The Russian commanders in here, they have commented before on how good Ukraine's defense is in and around Siversk. But we have Vimimka Vesely in here. There's a very interesting geolocation of ground made said by the Russian forces. So right on the outskirts, see where these two paddocks meet this T, right in here, what we can see again, I'll put this on the Telegram, you can go and watch it, that there was a Russian armoured assault. You can see these vehicles here being targeted by both artillery and drones. You can also see the snow on the ground and the conditions. These vehicles are moving up under incredibly heavy fire. This vehicle, of course, very, very on fire. But this vehicle can get its troops out of the vehicle. So these are Russian forces then moving out of the vehicle into fighting here, and then the vehicle retreating out of here still on fire and said to have taken up those positions. So it did manage to drop off crew and guys. I think the fate of the vehicle, to my eye, looks like it was then destroyed in the end here, as you can see. Some are saying it got out. I don't agree that it did. This was shared from Ukrainian pages, but said that they're definitely operating in and around this front, so at least the grey zone should definitely be shifted in here around Siversk. This area, as far as movement, is the least amount for some time. So let's talk about Kursk, the reality of this. Now, no movement on this map today, but take account that Kursk is 482 square kilometres. Russia occupy well over 110,000 in Ukraine. Those saying that this is a bargaining chip at the table, I ask where? And let's have a look at this. You need to get the leaders to the table anyway, and both want to be in a position of strength and both want to win that negotiation. I believe it will fall through. But I'll say this. Many would rather defend their ignorance than confront the discomfort of being wrong. Something we're going to see more and more through this. And I'm more than happy to change my mind on things with evidence, and you've seen that for now years. And we see David D here, very well-known pro-Ukrainian blogger and ex-intel in the American military. People need to stop talking and think and listen. Okay, what do you want to say? Kursk was never about the power plant, never about a buffer zone, never about the city of Kursk, never about a march on Moscow or holding lots of land. Although I was told on the first days of this from guys I know there who were saying the power plant was the goal, but the amount of ISR that the Russians saw, those assets saw us crossing the border, made this impossible very early on, and that's why it was limited to what it was. That is what I was told directly off the front line. I shared that at the time, and at the time I said, I do not understand this, but I'm willing to swing either way on if it's good or bad throughout more. And my opinion now is directly in that this is a net negative for Ukraine. Now, the comments under this say things like, it makes a problem for Russians in case for a land for peace negotiations will take place. Again, 482 square kilometres versus 111, 112,000 and increasing on that whilst Kursk is going the wrong way. It's going down to 400 and American officials are saying it may throughout January, then completely be nothing. So I don't know how many maths lessons that people have been to, but 480 is a hell of a lot less than 110,000, even at 5-1, which why would it be 5-1? It's still irrelevant. So that makes no sense. And other comments, Ukraine needs Russian land to trade back during negotiations. I get that, and it will be traded back. But even at 10-1, it's still irrelevant for the amount of ground occupied. I don't get it. I'm willing to listen to anyone. I'll talk to anyone about this. I'll talk to David about this. I'm happy. My email is there. But I don't understand it, okay? It was and still is about, okay, the first one he misses in this, and I believe the biggest one, showing the United States that Ukraine can still conduct offensive operations. That was the biggest win in this, followed by follow-on of long-range strategic strikes and pumping propaganda around North Koreans, therefore long-range strikes come in and potentially opening up to South Korean weapons, although that looks like it has been shot down. But number one, showing we can still conduct offensive operations, I believe is the biggest. But he says, building a defensive position, a fortress for Russians to attack. Incorrect. Fortifications to the extent of what has needed to be built in here have not been built. Speak to people on the ground, listen to commanders, look at ABC, look at Kiev Independent. Many people are saying we're concerned about, can we hold this for the fortifications which haven't been built, especially as the weather is getting worse. The logistics into here, these suck, especially in winter. Ukraine is surrounded on three sides in here. Russia has ISR overmatch, potential artillery overmatch in here, ground overmatch, train overmatch, this here. So no, this is not a fortress. Vuhledar, Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, Kurakhove, they are more fortresses here. And people saying, well, it's coming back so slow. I don't see, other than for propaganda, I don't see the benefit for Russia actually taking back this ground militarily. Okay, drawing 100,000 troops from Ukraine. This did not happen en masse. We know that some drone units, some VDV units, some special forces units definitely went to Kursk to stabilize or take back some ground. Definitely wasn't 100,000 troops have moved from Ukraine. From other areas, yes, have moved here. Has it stopped the frontline advancement? No, it hasn't. We do know that people are saying that Russia, quote, didn't take the bait here. That's what was trying to happen, 100,000 troops move. All it has done is just sped up. You go back and watch my videos from this time. I said the best strategic move for Russia is fucking ignore that and keep pushing here, because Ukraine's had to move units here. Just keep pushing in the south and the east. I believe that is what has happened. The stabilised, held it there, taken back some, stabilised it, and had larger advancement. It has sped up their pace in the south and the east. And what this did do, though, is it has drawn in Ukraine's best vehicles. Leopards, Charlies, Abrams, Bradleys. It has definitely drawn those into here. They were getting smashed by, or still are, by Russian fibre optic drones, as well as Ukraine's best soldiers going into here, killing large amounts of Russians in Russia. True. It's also killing a large amount of Ukrainians in Russia, not on occupied territory, fighting with that back. What is the percentage here? Is it 2-1, 3-1, 1-1? Well, we don't know. But what we do know is both Russia and Ukraine have lost a hell of a lot in here. And I would hazard a guess at it is not any more than 1-1. Forcing Russians to burn and blow up Russia, again, PR, propaganda. But Russia in the beginning did not want to use FABs in here from one of my sources. They didn't want to use that because of the damage and destruction of infrastructure. That has quickly turned. We see everything from FAB 500s to 3000s being dropped to try and take this back. Stop dooming, it's working. Okay, in my opinion, no, Kursk has been the biggest strategic mistake Ukraine has made. It's the biggest strategic mistake in this war. I am happy to be incorrect. I hope I'm incorrect, but no, it is not working in my opinion. And my opinion is formed off what guys at the front line are saying and what attritional protracted warfare doctrine says. Because every other front then sped up. Sharing and seeing the reality and sharing what you see as the reality, lining up with doctrine and what people are saying, and ignoring the obvious and spreading misinformation is dangerous. This is exactly what I spoke about in yesterday's video, where I believe some of these people have blood on their hands who are blatantly, obviously spreading misinformation that affects how people see the war, how people vote in democratic countries. All of this. I believe at the end of this war, there's going to be, and people should have some answers to what the fuck. This is one factor of why Ukraine suddenly, it seems, is in a bad way. So suddenly it seems like all out of nowhere, there's no men, no weapons, ground being lost. People are like surprised by it. And people are also surprised that Russia hadn't suddenly collapsed yet. What I'm saying is, in reality, it has been moving this way for some time. There was times to stop this happening, but I believe some event horizons have been crossed leading to the end of the war that we will potentially see. Maybe there's more plans in here. Maybe there's extra offensive operations in here. I can't see why pouring more troops to have more offensives in here is any better for trying to stop the border and the front line that is currently collapsing in the south and the east and has been for some time. I can see that would benefit Russia in here. The problem now has become that if Ukraine don't hold this, if they withdraw, what is going to stop Russia pushing on Sumy? This is where I believe the biggest mistake has been this Kursk operation. Again, my opinion isn't based off emotion. It is a lot of my opinions are because I really care about people, but my opinion on military actions is based off doctrine and what people are saying. In attritional war, any terrain that does not have vital industrial centre is irrelevant. It's always better to retreat and preserve forces, regardless of political consequences. Fighting on disadvantaged terrains burns up units, losing experienced soldiers who are key to victory. We have seen Russia fall into this trap, and we are seeing Ukraine fall into this trap, I believe, in Kursk. If Kursk, as Davey says, was not the power plant, it was not Kursk, then what is the industrial centre that makes this not irrelevant? Now, this gentleman here, now I'm unsure which video, but people are quoting him saying this, that the operation in Kursk was actually a disaster. It is a graveyard of the best Ukrainian troops and the best Ukrainian armoured vehicles. It weakens Ukraine and helps the Russians advance faster in all other areas. And I do agree with what is said by himself. Now let's go to then the ABC to further back up what I'm saying here. December the 28th, ABC, super pro-Ukrainian media on that side, okay? So what are they saying here? Bloodied Ukrainian troops risk losing more hard-won land in Kursk to Russia. Ukrainian troops are bloodied and demoralized by the risk of risk of defeat in Kursk. A region wants some to hold at all costs, while others question the value having gone in at all. I believe the people who are most wanting to hold this are people who are not actually there. We'll see. There is, of course, people on both sides, but let's get a reality of what's happening. Battles are so intense that some Ukrainian commanders can't evacuate the dead. Communication lags and poorly timed tactics have cost lives, troops, and have little way to counterattack. 7 frontline soldiers and commanders told the Associated Press on condition of anonymity so they could discuss sensitive operations. Russia has amassed more than 50,000 troops, and they claim there's 12,000 North Koreans here too. So again, people keep saying there's 50,000 Russian troops and 12,000 North Koreans, but then Zelensky comes out and says that 3,000 North Koreans have been killed and wounded so far. So shouldn't that be down at 9,000? And the conveniency of, no, but we couldn't take any of these guys. Again, the worst part is if this isn't propaganda, that this is true, and that Russia has 70,000+ soldiers in here. The worst point for Ukraine is if that isn't propaganda, that's true, then they're not stopping coming across that border. And if Russia get a foothold in then Sumy, and then you go to negotiations, they're going to say, well, we want that Oblast and Kharkiv as well, potentially. Anyway, Moscow's counterattack has killed and wounded thousands, and overstretched Ukrainians have lost more than 40% of the 984 square kilometres, 380 square miles of Kursk they have seized in August, down to, at this point in time, by Ukraine's deep state, 482 squared kilometres. So things aren't looking fantastic in there, but apparently we are doomers. But I'm using pro-Western, pro-Ukrainian media here to show this. 5 Ukrainians and Western officials in Kiev who spoke on condition to anonymity again, to freely discuss sensitive military matters, said they fear gambling on Kursk will weaken the whole 1,000-kilometre front line, and Ukraine is losing precious ground in the east, just like we have spoken about. Remember, if you have any other opinion dissenting away from the official narrative, you have to speak on condition of anonymity, or you will get the deep state treatment. We have, as I say, hit a hornet's nest. We have stirred up another hotspot. This is from a major in the 95th Air Assault Brigade. And I'm going to say that Stepan Siv here, a major in the Airborne Assault Brigade, is probably going to have more of an idea of what's going on there than you or I on Telegram or Twitter and opinion. So I'll happily build my opinion on how I see it off some gentleman like himself. Army Chief Alexander Syrsky has said that Ukraine launched this operation because the officials thought Russia was about to launch a counterattack on northeast Ukraine, and said that we have basically squashed any offensive operations here. And I cast doubt on this because Russia wasn't ready to have any defense here and had limited soldiers, and it took them a couple of weeks to even bring tanks and soldiers into here. If they were ready to launch another attack here, it would have been ready to rock and roll. You could have caught them by surprise, but it wouldn't have taken them weeks just to bring in tanks. It began on August the 5th with an order to leave Ukraine's Sumy region for what they thought would be a 9-day raid to stun the enemy. This raid, this would have worked. When I first started reporting on this in August, I said Ukraine will be in and out in a couple of days. They'll go in, kill, capture who they need in this raid. That would have been very beneficial. I believe would have been very beneficial because it wouldn't have given Russia time to start moving soldiers. By Ukraine would have had time to then withdraw. Now Russia has amassed troops that now they're saying is in 70,000, 60,000 to, my maths is off there, 60, 70,000 troops to go potentially into Sumy. A raid would have made complete tactical strategic sense for capturing POWs, killing guys, but like people say, Russia is very slow to stand up, and I believe that is exactly what we have seen here. Gathering his men, one company commander told them, we're making history. The whole world will know about us. This hasn't been done since World War II. I ask, how did that end, though, in World War II? That made history. Privately, he was less certain. It seemed crazy. I didn't understand why. So another commander here, a company commander. These are the most experienced combat soldiers in the world, are majors, all the way from private to major. The guys actually will be near the front line from Ukraine and Russia. Shocked by success achieved largely because the Russians were caught by surprise. The Ukrainians were ordered to advance beyond their original mission to the town of Korenova. We don't know what the original mission was. I was told it was the power plant. But this goes into what we spoke about here. If Russia was ready to launch an assault in here, then why were they caught out such by surprise? Not only by surprise, but didn't have the assets available because maybe there was no assault. Again, Let's have a look at this. By early November, the Russians began regaining territory rapidly. Once in awe of what they accomplished, troops' opinions are shifting as they come to terms with losses. One company commander said half his troops are dead or wounded. So half of his guys are dead or wounded. Now, there's been a lot of Russian losses in here too, but Russia is numerically very superior to Ukraine in numbers, definitely. Some frontline commanders said conditions are tough, morale is low, and troops are questioning command decisions, even the very purpose of occupying Kursk. One commander said that some orders his men have received don't reflect reality because of delays in communication. They don't understand where our side is, where the enemy is, what's under our control, and what isn't. They don't understand the operational situation. We so act at our own discretion, and even as someone who looks at the maps, to get an idea of exactly what's happening in Kursk is incredibly difficult. And I still, from the day one to now, at least I've been consistent saying I don't understand the goal in this. One platoon commander said higher-ups have repeatedly turned down his request to change his unit's defensive position because he knows his men can't hold the line. I thought it was a fortress. Continuing saying those people who stand until the end are ending up missing in action. He said he also knows at least 20 Ukrainian soldiers whose bodies have been abandoned over the last 4 months because the battles were too intense to evacuate them without more casualties. Ukrainian soldiers said they were not prepared for the aggressive Russian response in Kursk and cannot counterattack or pull back, saying there's no other option. We'll fight here because if we just pull back our borders, they won't stop. They will keep advancing. This, I think, will be known in the future, potentially, if negotiations don't happen, but I think in the future could be known as the Kursk backfire. And the long history of the Kursk region and fighting, the Kursk backfire will be that Russians push across into Sumy, Ukraine need those men in other areas, and then you're going to have 60,000 crossing the border here. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if negotiations don't happen, I can't see it not happening. Eyeing frontline losses in eastern region, known as the Donbass, where Russia is closing on a crucial supply hub. Some soldiers are more vocal about whether Kursk has been worth it. All the military can think about now is that Donbass has simply been sold. But at what price? So it's been sold at what price is that this has jeopardized areas down in the southwest. Southeast of the country. And this is what I've been saying, and I said it from day one. This could jeopardize the east. And we've seen then the fall of areas like Ugledar through to Kurakhove, through all of these sectors, and potentially Velika Novosilka, Pokrovsk, Udachny, Minograd. And if those fall, which I believe they very likely will in the coming months or weeks, if I was a commander or soldier, would be looking at Kursk going, well, the tens of thousands of soldiers we had there would have been fantastic here. Now, electricity, power, gas, energy in general. This is a huge talking point for this war, and the Europeans' reliance on cheap American security, cheap Russian energy, and now that is getting turned around with the war and with the new American administration entering power. Zelensky has had some very firm words against then Slovakia's leader, Robert Fico. It appears that Putin gave Fico the order to open the second energy front against Ukraine at the expense of Slovak people's interests. So basically saying that then there's another front line of war. Fico's threats to cut off Ukraine's emergency power energy this winter, Russian attacks our power plants and grid energy can only be explained by this. So basically saying that he's with Putin on launching war. But what I will say is, what you're forgetting here, though, is that Ukraine in the middle of winter is also cutting off a gas supply to Slovakia. And then very interesting, we see things like this. Today, 6 hours ago, Ukraine receives first shipment of US LNGs, liquid natural gas. It's all lining up a little bit. The only reasons Ukraine now needs to import electricity are Russia's occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its use of missiles and Shahed drones purposely destroy a large portion of Ukraine's heat and hydroelectric power generation. So, of course, Ukraine has to rely on external energy because Russia is bombing those dual-purpose energy systems in the war. But then blaming that, Fico is right on this side of Putin, which I do not agree with. I believe that Fico is a Slovakian nationalist, and he's going, what is the best for our people? Although Zelensky then vehemently disagrees with this. Thanks to the heroic efforts of energy workers, Lifesaving Corporation, partners have managed to prevent a full blackout in Ukraine, although there are running blackouts in many areas. I do wonder how long this can go. Fico's short-sighted policy has deprived the Slovak people of compensation for losing Russian gas transit. Now, the rumours are that this was at $500 million, but I don't know if that would compensate directly for it. It now risks depriving Slovaks of another 200 million per year, which Ukraine pays for the imported electricity. Yes, this critical import does not come free. The cost is significant. Again, the cost, yes, but that is coming through things like the IMF and donations from things like the EU, Russia, not Russia, the EU, America, Australia, whatever. So they're sort of paying for it, but I don't know if that compensation makes up for it. And what you need to understand in this is that Germany was cost billions of dollars in gas and taxpayer by Nord Stream going down too. And we see this. This is from one of my Aussie guys that sends stuff across me. Most of the redacted things you see are from this gentleman here. Very experienced in this sector of the world too. I won't say more than that. At the end of your last video, you talked about Germans being pissed at this war and at Ukraine. Completely true. Germans are getting bolder and starting to criticise their government publicly about the way they keep supplying Ukraine after Ukraine blew up a pipeline the German taxpayer funded. And then Zelensky flies in and makes demands. And we've seen the NATO secretary also say that Zelensky needs to wind it back a notch. Third, everyone in Europe, including the people of Slovakia, will find it more profitable from every perspective to work and neighbours in the EU increase Europe's energy resource supply, including gas from America and other partners. No, gas from America is significantly more expensive than cheap gas from Russia. Now, I agree. The EU should have had sovereign, independent gas, but they didn't. And now this has happened, but no way is that shipped on ships into Europe going to be as cheap as through this, especially at limited pricing by Russian gas. Slovakia is part of a single European energy market, and Fico must have respect for common European rules. There was a blow-up of gas pipeline. Any arbitrary decisions in Bratislava or Moscow's orders to Fico regarding electricity cannot cut Ukraine's power supply, but they can certainly cut current Slovak authorities' ties to the European community. So basically saying that, yes, they can't stop Fico cutting power to Ukraine, what is happening here, but they can cut current Slovak authorities' ties to the European community. That is a big threat. But I ask here, Zelensky, who is the European community? Are you talking the EU? Because if you're talking the EU, Ukraine is not in the EU. If you're talking the European community, as far as Europe, well, Moscow is in Europe as well. This is what I'm getting at. The most dangerous outcome of this war is divisions started within EU, within NATO, and alliances shift. That guys like Fico, guys like Orban, whoever else go, look, what the fuck is this bullshit we're copying about wanting to be sovereign national? The only country which is allowed to be nationalistic is Ukraine. The only ones allowed to be, the only white people allowed to be nationalistic are Ukrainians. Now, I have no problem with that, but if he's going, look, I just want the best for Slovaks, then what the fuck? The danger in this is these countries go, well, actually, my goals and whatever align more so with Russia, and without a shot fired, you end up with countries in Central Eastern Europe looking towards other alliances. Now, people might say that conspiratorial. Look at the history of the world, constant state of flux, especially in bloody Europe. Dangerous, dangerous things. Now, Fico has replied to this saying, what didn't fit on the press? One, if someone wants to organise peace talks in Slovakia, we'll be ready and hospitable. That's on another point we can talk about another day. But by stopping gas transit, President Zelensky will cause billions of damage to the EU, including the Slovak Republic. Although, as Zelensky's pointed out, $200 million in electricity, yes, potentially $500 million in compensation, but what he's saying is, no, it's in the billions. And there will be further reduction on the EU competitiveness. This is a problem in the Western world as a whole. Because energy is so fucking expensive, and I believe Australia has some of the highest, if not the highest, electricity rates in the world, because of this price of things. Our competitiveness in international industrial markets is just not there. We cannot make this. This would cost us $150 if it was Australian made, but this, which for my little teleprompter, costs like 99 cents in China, and a lot of that comes from, yes, wages, but that can boil down to things like power, electricity, gas prices, energy, and the competitiveness there can be a huge problem, especially when we're getting told to gear up for war with Russia and China. It seems that the big people in the EU don't mind. France, Germany, whoever else. This is the problem. See the division forming? This, I believe, is the biggest danger. No one can threaten conventionally, militarily, no one can threaten NATO, EU, economically, no, not economically because of BRICS, but militarily, as long as they're together. But division, wow, that can cause big problems. The main thing is that in the name of an unrealistic goal of weakening Russia, so it says weakening Russia is unrealistic, Slavs will continue to kill each other. And what we do see in this is Slavs are killing each other, and it's a horrible thing. People that say, oh, they're not brothers, they're not this and that. I'm sorry, but that's incorrect. The distance between Kiev and Moscow is less than here to Melbourne. I consider people in Melbourne similar. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be pissed, but at the end of the day, history, everything here is so similar. It is a catastrophe of what is happening with thousands dying. This guy here, Peter Johnson, he has a very interesting take on this, and I did think about this a lot, and I share things I think about, and I'm happy to re-zero my thinking as we go. I have some questions. Can Slovakia afford to pay 3 to 5 times more for the US gas compared to the Russian gas? Is it possible that Slovakia will increase its own energy consumption from other sources than gas when they don't receive Russian gas? So at this point in time, that he's saying basically is if the gas is cut, Slovakia has to look at other times because they can't afford gas. We're looking at electricity. That's going to be more expensive, more difficult. And is that possible? And can they afford it? Is it possible that Slovakia therefore cannot afford to export electricity without sacrificing its own energy needs? So is it because you're not giving gas, that's cut off, their reliance on electricity is more, therefore we can't give you electricity, Ukraine. Ukraine is in a crisis, but that doesn't mean other countries around Ukraine should put themselves in a crisis. I agree with this. They should help, but they shouldn't put themselves in a crisis. I think that is what Fitzo would be saying. He tags Zelensky and says, isn't it better you push for Germany to reopen its nuclear power plants? Then there will be more than enough energy to share with Ukraine without needing to negotiate with countries close to Russia, both geographically, politically as well. And I agree with that. Why isn't it Germany? Open up your fucking power plants to this. Germans, as we have spoken about this, maybe vehemently against this and becoming less and less patient. But again, we will see. Legends, we went over a lot in this. I'm sorry this went so long. I have a lunch to get to. Look after yourselves. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.